Hey, welcome to the Business Wingman Show. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I know most people in certain business functions are faced with, sometimes weekly, but they don't know how to deal with it. And it's the art of saying no. When you really know that the right thing to do is to tell people no, but you're either afraid of whatever blowback you think might happen, or something might also happen which makes the situation worse, you just default to yes. My name is Steve Smith. I'm the host of the Business Wingmen Show, and I'm joined with my co-host Travis. And so we're going to dive into this because believe me when I tell you, the worst thing you can do, and I have done it in the past myself, is say yes when you know in your head you should be saying no, and then you have to deal with the consequences, knowing you should have said no, but now you have to fulfill the yes. So, Travis, I know something happened recently with you that I think is a great example of saying no and actually getting the customer to appreciate it. Give us, without going too much into the weeds, what basically transpired that made this relevant?
Well, as you had said a moment ago, the art of saying no. So there actually was a book that was written on that. So we're not, for purposes of clarity here, we're not talking about the book today. I think it's more of just art as in the process, right? And
Right.
how you go about saying no to people, whether that's a friend, your boss, a client, right? It doesn't matter. There is a good and appropriate process we should take. Now, the situation that I experienced was a customer reached out to us and they had a need that I think they thought would fit into what we do as business.
Hmm.
Well, when we evaluated the need, we determined that it just wasn't the right fit for us. No, so I think on first blush, that's a good thing, right? Because we're being honest about the fact that, hey, we're just not the right provider for you here.
Right.
Where the missed opportunity was in that situation was how it was communicated to the customer. So
Oh,
while the intent of that communication was professional and it was to say thank you, but no thank you, the way it was received was not that. And so that's why we're going to talk about this today. It's, when you're in that moment where you really think you should say no and you think that that's the right outcome, how do you do that and not burn the bridge in the process?
and I would even go as far as to say for people who might have know they're in this situation or know they have this chronic problem, when you do feel like you need to say no, what is the best reason for having to say no? Is it, oh, we're booked up, we're at max capacity, so we're not taking any more clients? I don't know if that's necessarily the right one to do, but what's the reason for saying no and having it sound legitimate?
Well, in the situation that we just experienced, uh, uh, a company that we had been interacting with, they were not a client, so they were a prospect, finally came back to us and said, hey, we have an opportunity for you.
Oh
And
boy.
these are the things that you want, right?
Right.
You're building a relationship proactively so that when a need arises, they think of you first. Well, that need, while yes, quote unquote, it fell within the area of work that we do, the way they were approaching the engagement of partners and vendors is just not something we participate in. So what that actually is something that's called an RFP, which RFP, for those who are listening, you're unfamiliar with that term. What that means is request for proposal. There's other ways people describe that, RFI, request for information, and so forth. But most often what that is, it's a formal process a company will undertake to collect data and information from their supply chain partners on how they would approach doing work or providing materials or product. And then, of course, cost associated.
Sure.
So we have, it's not black and white, but it's pretty close to that. We don't engage in RFPs as a business, our company. So uh, I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. Why do you think we would do that?
I don't know. As you were explaining this, I was kind of going through in my head and wondering, and here's the only thing that I can think of, and it's based on The few times that I have been asked to provide an RFP was because it was a government contract. And typically, they are very, very voluminous documents. I mean, there's all manner of things you have to commit to, you have to divulge, and then it really boils down to who's going to give them the best price. So after going through one of these things several years ago and getting the full magnitude of this process, what I realized was it wasn't the type of business I was necessarily interested in anyway. So I stopped complying with RFPs. People send them and say, listen, I appreciate the offer. However, for this reason, I don't think I'd be a good fit for your company, so I'm going to pass. So that's the way I get out of them. But that's my guess. So is it something different, or is that the reason?
No, and you hit most of them. So the reason our business doesn't participate in RFPs is for many of the things you outlined. I think first and foremost, the process, the documentation, the back and forth meetings, um, it it's a significant amount of time.
Yes.
The secondary piece though is I have been through many of these earlier in my career, and what I have learned as a result is there's almost always a company that's an incumbent or has a leg up or a relationship with that particular client, and the client's not disclosing that. So basically, kind of what they're doing is they're shopping around to make sure before they make a decision that they've done some due diligence to make sure the decision they're about to make is the right decision.
Right.
So
Yeah, I agree.
what that ends up meaning is all of the other companies that participated potentially in the RFP spent a whole bunch of time and were not set up to be successful in that process.
Right. Right. Now, okay, so this happened to me. It was before COVID, so we'll just say 5, 6 years ago. I had a person contact me through my website, filled out the little box, said I'd like to have a consult. And so we had it. And the lady had a business that she had started, and she was really struggling with marketing. And so what she was looking for was help with marketing. And in about the first 5 to 8 minutes of the conversation, I had determined, based on what she had already done and what she was trying to accomplish, that this probably was not going to be the right engagement for me to be in. So I basically, without saying no, I said, look, I said, I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do, because you can do all this on your own and save you some money. And later on, if you figure out, you can always come back. But believe me, for what you're trying to accomplish, this is probably the best thing for you. So I said, get a sheet of paper, get a pen. I'm going to give you the steps. I gave her like 18 steps of things to do. None of them earth-shattering or backbreaking, but all just sequential, how to build a marketing plan and execute the thing. And, it was a 30-minute phone call. Everything was fine. I said, hey, good luck. And I did that. I wanted to give her some value because I didn't want to just say no and hang up. So that was my way of offloading her and giving her something to work on. Well, wouldn't you know, 3 weeks later, she calls back and she says, I've started working on some of this stuff. She goes, I realize this is just too hard for me. I can't do this myself, So at that point, I kind of felt like I had to say yes. Now, in hindsight, should have found another reason to disengage, because it was not a relationship that went well for a lot of reasons. It was just a mismatch in general. But that was an example of me trying to offload somebody by giving them something to work with, hoping that would solve the problem, and it didn't. So sometimes your best efforts to say no to people, professionally and courteously, don't always work out.
Well, and I think the reason for that at times is because people don't like being told no.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So not everybody, but there's a certain portion of the population that just struggles when they're told no.
Right.
They're,
Right.
especially if you're talking with executives, they're just not used to hearing, right?
Yes.
So that's why it's so important, the delivery. And I think that's where we should kind of take the rest of this discussion today is when you're in that moment and you realize that this is a no, it's not a yes. How am I going to deliver this so that At the same time, I also don't blow up the relationship in the process.
Yes. All right. So based on the example that you gave to start this broadcast off, in hindsight now, if you could go back and replay that whole thing, what would be the mechanism that you would put in place to salvage the no so you didn't get the outcome you're now dealing with?
So I think the first thing would be you schedule a meeting to talk about what the request is, right? Because the request came to us via email, and then the subsequent response was via email. Really hard to control the narrative when you're communicating electronically, like, right? It's very easy for people to perceive things differently, even though that might not have been your intention. So I think what we need to do moving forward is get at least on the telephone at a bare minimum, either a telephone, in-person meeting, or online meeting, and just ask a couple fact-finding questions, right? Maybe the RFP, even though that's what they said, maybe that's not really important, or maybe they're open to a different process, right? But then the next thing is, once you've asked a couple questions, if you're still feeling like it's a no, don't tell them that right there in the moment, right? Take some time, even if that time is an hour. Say thanks for your time. We're going to further consider what was discussed here. We'll get back to you shortly, right? Because I think that that's really important, because it shows that you're really taking the time to think through the information that you have, and so it's not an off the cuff kind of spur response.
Right. A knee jerk no. Yes. Yes.
Correct. But during that down period of the meeting, the discussion has concluded, you've not said no yet. I think a really good habit to get into is to practice saying no before you actually have to say no. Have you ever done that before?
Oh, absolutely. And I would tell you that the reason people are uncomfortable saying no and having it be final is they don't recognize the fact that saying no has two components to it. It's using the word no, and it's having the right tone behind the no that signals to the other person there's nothing left to talk about. And many people, they use the word no, but the tone behind it leaves an opening for somebody to debate or push back on or question.
Yeah. Yeah. So meaning we weren't resolute in our response.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
as you know, sometimes a no is a yes,
Yeah.
just not right now,
Right.
right? I
Right.
agree. And I think so if we have practice ahead of time, and then we get into the discussion, which again should not be via email, at a bare minimum on the telephone. When we are delivering that message, I think it needs to start off first by, hey, one, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for coming to us. We're grateful. Two, here's what we heard and here's what we learned. As a result of that, at this time, it's not the right opportunity for us. Here is why. The key thing, though, in the here is why comment, as I do air quotes for those who are listening to us, is that doesn't mean you need to spill your guts and give them every little nuance and every little detail as to why you're declining the opportunity.
Right. Right.
Right? Give them one piece, which may be the key driver, and then be resolute in that response and don't apologize to them.
Yes, I agree. You're right. You need to take it to a point in the road where there's a barrier up, that you can't go beyond. And I like the idea of taking the time to consider it and getting back to them. And when you do, I've always had the practice of first letting them know that you really appreciate the fact that they allowed you into the process. But the things that you talked about and the things that as a supplier or provider of service that we do really well isn't a good match for what they're asking for. And so to allow them to get the best partner in this, you have to back away. So the answer is no. And I think if you always put it on their side of the table, it's very, they might not like the response, but they can't argue with the fact that you've considered them. It's not just been, well, we don't feel like we want to take this on. So,
And I think that's one of the best ways to go about it, right? And the phrase I like to use in these moments is, if I'm putting myself in your shoes,
hmm,
I would hope one of the partners, one of the vendors I'm interacting with would be as honest and candid as I'm being with you right now.
oh,
Because,
interesting.
right? Because at the end of the day, like you just said, the customer, we want to make sure the customer has the best option. If we believe we're not the best option, why continue going through the charade, right?
Yes. Yes.
When,
Oh,
you know,
yeah. Because look, here's the other thing. If you say no and the person or the company finds a way to turn that around and feel like they've convinced you that you need to stay in it, what does that bode for the relationship going forward?
right.
I mean, if I was the person looking for a supplier of some service and felt I had to do that, I'm only doing it to save my own face. I'm not really doing it because now I have a high level of trust in whatever we're going to collaborate on going down the road. So you do need to give them an opportunity to back away with that no and feel, with face, having face or saving face rather, because anything they try to do to rebut it isn't really going to produce the best outcome anyway.
Right. So, at the point in which you've delivered the no, you've explained the reason why that's the case, you've thanked them for the opportunity. At least in our industry, and I know a lot of other industries work like this, the phrase you'll hear people use is that we're going to non-bid this opportunity. I think that's totally appropriate, right? Because it's the the phrase of no can be, I don't want to say harsh, but you want to make sure that you're coupling that with appropriate language, which is, it. We're not saying no because we can't do the work. We're saying no because it just doesn't fit. Oh, and by the way, the next time an opportunity comes up, here's the best way to engage us, right?
Mm.
Because what you don't want to have happen is, by the fact that you said no here, now it means no every other time that they have an
Right.
opportunity.
Right. Yes.
So controlling that discussion by saying, thank you again. It's a no now. We're going to non bid this opportunity. Here's why. That said, moving forward, if other stuff comes up, which would be A, B, C, D, here's how to engage us.
Hmm. Now, I will tell you that when I've had email offers to do certain things, and I've responded back and basically said, "Hey, I appreciate the fact that you contacted me and made this offer. I've reviewed it and decided it's probably not the best fit." And so instead of saying no, a lot of times I'll say, "At this time, I'm going to pass on your offer." And so that's kind of a less intrusive way of saying no, but it gets the same message across. At this time, I'm going to pass on your offer. And I've had people send emails back saying, "Hey, we appreciate the fact that you got back to us and acknowledged, this RFP and that you're telling us so we can move on to something else." Because most people will just ghost the situation, and then the folks that maybe put out 8 or 10 of these, they have no idea whether it got tossed into the spam bucket or it went to the wrong person, or so now they're going to do follow up. And I don't want them to spend time following up on a decision I've already made.
Well, and I think that type of language is really good for situations where you have somebody that's trying to sell something to you that you just don't need.
Right.
And so, where I see this come up is maybe a colleague that you don't work with, but they're in the industry, or a friend or a family member,
Somebody on LinkedIn. Yeah, something
right,
like that. Right.
is either directly hitting you up or has connected you with someone that is now hitting you up.
Right.
And for whatever reason, you just don't need it, right?
Right.
You don't want to engage in it. You don't want to take meetings to talk about it. It's just not it's not the need right
Right.
now. I love the way that you just phrased that, which is, hey, thanks so much for reaching out. I'm going to pass at this moment,
Yeah.
you know, and that's it.
I've never had pushback or any other kind of irritating response. Most people just say, "Hey, appreciate the follow-up, the getting back and letting us know." And I know that most of the time when you get stuff like this, it's not the actual business. Sometimes they've hired a marketing or a sales company to send untold numbers of these things out just to see who's going to respond. So you do have to kind of consider that as well in terms of who's really sending this thing and do you even know this company? But I do think the ability to say no confidently and preserve whatever relationship and whatever phase it's in intact, I think does require a little finesse in terms of thinking through it and saying, okay, if I handle it this way, what's going to be the outcome? Is there a better way to get the message across, have it be the final message, and have people like the fact that you said that?
So the one last thing that I would say, just to kind of close the loop on this whole process we've been talking about, is hopefully you were able to have that discussion via phone at a minimum, in-person meeting, or an online meeting. I would recommend, especially if it's a customer, I would recommend following up with a thank you email. And in that thank you email, you don't have to reiterate every little nuance that
Right,
occurred in the meeting,
right.
but it's worth just acknowledging thanks once again for reaching out to us and considering us. We look forward to continuing to get to know you, continuing to build a relationship, or we look forward to the next opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think that's right because you're basically leaving the door open and solidifying the fact that in this one situation you didn't feel it was the right thing to move forward on, but if there certainly could be other things that you would want to talk about at a later date. So yeah, I totally, and I think if you get good at the follow-up practice, that leaves an impression with people that even though they may not have liked to have figured out that you didn't want to work with them for whatever reason, they still look at you as a professional organization. And believe me, that's not a big quantity out there today. So anytime you can put yourself in that situation, you've just kind of, notched yourself one more level above most people that do what you do.
Agreed. So I think the big takeaway here is if you're going to have to deliver a no, to the best of your ability, take time in doing that. Don't
Right.
hurry through that process. And if possible, try to do that so you can see that person or at least talk to that person.
Yeah.
Try never to do that via email.
Yeah, I agree. And I think taking the time is probably the most sage advice that came out of this episode today because too many people want to get it off their plate and respond immediately. And to the person on the other end, it doesn't feel like a considered opinion, something you thought through. It's just a knee jerk. I don't have time for this. I don't need it. I don't want it. The answer is no. And of course, again, you may not have said those words, but the intonation with the tone suggests that that's exactly what you were thinking about, which led you to that decision. So I think that's a perfect little thing for people in a face-to-face, phone-to-phone, whatever the communication connection is, take some measure of time before responding. All right, folks, listen, thanks for being with us today. This was a short one, but I think it's one that if you have trouble saying no to people, work on this, figure out what the problem is, come up with a little strategy that you can walk yourself through. Because the better you get at this, the more time you will spend not doing work that you knew wasn't a good fit. But once you've said yes, you've got to go through with it. That is living in hell, as far as I'm concerned. And you need to avoid that as much as possible. So thanks for being with us. As always, we bring out new material every Tuesday, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can find us on any podcast channel that you're on. Simply type in Business Wingmen and our page will show up. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe. And we look forward to reaching out to you soon. Travis, this was a great topic today. Thanks.